Sam Lake, the man who wrote 2001's instant hit Max Payne. In 2003, he, along with the rest of Remedy's creative leadership, embarked once more into the darkness in search for their next great game.
It took a while for us to figure out what the next project would be. After more than a year of work, we kind of landed with the idea of the original concept of Alan Wake.
Creative discovery isn't an exact science. Game development in particular is messy, iterative. What works one day may be irrelevant the next. What might be fun in isolation becomes tedious set among more compelling styles of play. Video game pre-production is feeling around in the dark, determinedly wrapping your arms around a whole concept that you can't fully see, finding the fun. But the darkness harbors more than just ideas in wait.
I think there was pressure after Max Payne, and it kind of came from different directions. First of all, it was the old curse of the second album. Sure, there had been 2 Max Payne games, but it was kind of one thing. It's hard to follow up that kind of success, so there's a pressure to make something as good.
In 2004, Rockstar redefined the open world genre. Again, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, with its previously unseen scope and breadth of play, set the direction of AAA game design for years to come.
There was a feeling that, after the Max Payne games, we should move away from a linear experience. From that perspective came the idea of a free-roaming open world. But at the same time, still as an echo for Max Payne, there was a desire for cinematic action.
Beyond the allure of popular design trends, the need to remain funded and within the good graces of corporate leadership are substantial pressures as well. This is former BioWare executive producer Mark Dara.
So executives are the stakeholders you need to get past. They aren't your final customer, but there's someone who can stop you from reaching that final customer. Dragon Age Inquisition was developed under 3 different CEOs. The first CEO was John Riccitiello. He's the one that said, "You should put the ability to ride dragons into your game," which I nodded and said, "We'll look into it," and ignored. Then he left and we had CEO Larry Prost, the chairman of the board, acting as temporary CEO. And then, after that, the CEO became Andrew Wilson.
With shifting leadership comes shifting priorities and expectations. In his retrospective, Mark describes the organizational politics that cornered BioWare into building Dragon Age Inquisition on the ill-suited Frostbite engine over Unreal Engine, as well as how he and other creative leads had to misrepresent the game's scope to certain EA executives, buying enough time to finish the game up to par with BioWare's internal standard. Unreasonable schedule constraints are a mainstay of game development crunch culture, but they don't only come down from suits on high. Sometimes, they are exacerbated by too many good ideas competing in pre-production. Back to Sam Lake.
It was a rather long and winding pre-production period for Alan Wake. We were prototyping and exploring relatively wildly and widely on different things, and honestly also being lost with it along the way. This period of time from 2005 just kept on going and going. People were feeling tired and frustrated trying to bring these elements together. Our publisher, Microsoft Studios, were seeing us struggling with this thing. As we went further, they were chipping in. Clearly trying to help, suggesting different things. But it was just a case of more cooks coming to the kitchen.
Lake and other project leads ultimately convened to triage Alan Wake's design, keeping only its most critical elements and committing to its final form as a linear third-person shooter. But securing a vision and effectively communicating it to the development team can be a completely different effort entirely, as Mark Dara discovered on Inquisition.
It took us a long time to figure out how to communicate the vision to a team of over 200 people in a way where the majority of people were understanding it and able to get behind it. But this also outlines something that I learned on Dragon Age Inquisition. Sometimes people are never getting on board. From those people, unfortunately, what you'll often get is a statement like, "I don't know what the vision is." And because Inquisition spent so long where that was a legitimate concern, because we weren't always being clear, it took us a long time to realize that some of our loudest voices of confusion were actually the voices of dissension, disguising themselves as voices of confusion.
In video game production, there is no up from which pressure falls. The game is a singularity, with its creators desperately fighting to let only certain forces influence the final work, deflecting everything else back out of orbit. With enough effort, goodwill, and luck, what emerges is a unique thrill unlike any other art form. Salen and Zimmerman once wrote, "The goal of successful game design is meaningful play. but play is something that emerges from the functioning of a game's rules. As a game designer, you can never directly design play, you can only design the rules that give rise to it. So you see, a video game may be done when it escapes into the wild, but as an artwork, it isn't complete until it is played. My name is Jeremy Ledbetter. I'm a game author. I've always had a broad appreciation for games across genre and even quality, but Alan Wake unsettled me. It is wild and challenging and spectacular, but frequently unplayable. Not buggy or crash-prone, the game just quietly narrows player agency on a whim, sometimes slipping into long stints of player ambivalent storytelling. To help illuminate my point, let's look at the title's opening moments, where we get the gist of Alan Wake's gameplay. Vaulting, dodging, sprinting, shooting, flashing. No, not that kind of flashing. This kind of flashing. Altogether, these gameplay mechanics comprise what Dr. Bettina Bodhi describes as the possibility space of meaningful choice. She defines player agency as exercising these choices via player action that translates into avatar action afforded and constrained by a game's design. A game's spectrum of meaningful choice naturally shrinks and grows throughout play. For example, our ability to shoot a firearm is usually contingent on having ammo and loading that ammo in the gun. And the same is true for non-resource based actions as well. If the protagonist can vault, but there's nothing to vault over, that's just not an option. This is what I like to think of as natural fluctuations in player agency. Expansion and reduction of this possibility space is one of the most powerful tools in game design. Developers can curate specific experiences based on the frequency of available player action. A few common ways of tuning this frequency are tying actions to a depleting or charging energy reserve, limiting repeated use of powerful actions, or giving temporary access to them respectively. When these rules are logically intuitive, they give us confidence to experiment within their reliable bounds, forming our own personal strategies that we can either practice at excelling in or evolve as we play. This isn't the only way the possibility space can vary, however. Sometimes, it's necessary to limit players to a few specific actions in order to stage certain story moments. After Alan Wake's opening gameplay, we're presented with an extended introduction of the game's primary setting, Bright Falls. During this, the player is limited to walking and the occasional interaction prompt, intercut with a bevy of pre-rendered videos, all establishing the cast and main conflict. I applaud Wake's designers for staging the majority of this intro in-engine, allowing us to move through it at our own pace. But the intro's level of agency is rather superficial relative to the game's combat loop, and it doesn't really sustain the title's lengthy 30-minute beginning. Even as I enjoyed the atmosphere and rising stakes, the game quickly exhausted any desire I had for walking around and taking in the sights. It all began to feel a little like having to hold a button just to watch TV. This is what I'd consider an artificial fluctuation in player agency. Nothing inherent about the world prevents Alan from running through town or shooting someone in the face, except for the plot itself. Now, this is still a game, a third-person shooting game at its start, no less. Video games don't have to be in a constant state of play, of course, but in my incredibly humble opinion, players should be playing with the full foundation of possible actions more often than not, especially at the beginning.
This is the part where you listen. This is the part where you watch. You have no control here.
Alan Wake exercises artificial fluctuation in other ways too. The game is divided into 6 episodes, each resetting the player's inventory and weapon upgrades upon beginning. Certain plot points in between do the same. This was done to make us more vulnerable during specific moments of the story, but this heavy-handed design imposes consequence removed from player cause. It punishes those who are judiciously managing their inventory while discouraging exploration of the surrounding game world. See, there are extra supplies tucked away in the dark corners of Bright Falls, but when such treats are wiped from existence at arbitrary intervals, there's just less incentive to go looking unless you're just desperately low on resources. Remedy remedies this in a big way in Alan Wake 2. While 2 retains its chapter-based structure, the player no longer starts with a blank inventory at the beginning of a new section. In 2, designers leverage an alternate approach for making Alan and Saga vulnerable, by maintaining a high damage output from enemies, decreasing the effectiveness of a player's standard firearm, increasing the reload times of more powerful weapons, all while limiting our inventory space and traversal speed. This approach requires a lot more design tuning, but in effect, it shifts the challenge and vulnerability forced in Alan Wake 1 by an artificial fluctuation to a natural one. Vulnerability is baked into the interactive systems of gameplay itself. Now, that's not to say that all artificial fluctuations in player agency are bad, just that it's a sledgehammer of design tools. And if designers aren't careful, using that sledgehammer can undermine other aspects of their design. If creative software and systemic tuning are the tools of the game author, it's fair to frame the possibility space of player agency as the tools of the play author. But tools are just one half of this equation, an opportunity loaded with potential. If game authors create games from desire, then it follows that play authors create play from desire as well. I suppose before we go on, I should address what I mean by play author. Obviously, by game author, I just mean the all-encompassing spectrum that is game developers, but do I actually think that players are authors, that gameplay is art? Yeah, I do. It's art for a limited audience, art that emerges from art, but art just the same. In some ways, games are akin to a musical instrument, beautiful on their own, no doubt, but not reaching their full artistic potential until played with. I'm not saying that this is a moniker that anyone should go around using, like, I'm not a gamer, I'm a player author. Oof, no. You would sound like such a weird little douche. But I do think it's useful for game authors in particular to think of their player base this way. Considering that people play games because they are an active form of entertainment, the motivation of the game author ought to be, what's the maximally entertaining way to let the player do what I want to allow them to within the bounds of the experience that I am trying to convey. In his GDC talk, Scott Rigby proposes that volition isn't independence or freedom to do whatever you want. It's wanting to do the things that you are doing. And in Alan Wake, what we're doing is laid out plain and clear in its opening dream tutorial. These are the strings of the Alan Wake instrument. There's something peculiar about the music that arises from playing Alan Wake. Some actions in its possibility space are a little out of tune. Take this moment where Alan is hunted by an onslaught of law enforcement. In my attempt at some savvy sidestepping, I bailed on the main path for a narrow route through some trees and boulders. Surely this is possible, I assumed. The gap is wide enough, Alan can jump, but as you see, my assumption was wrong. At the start of this level, the designer said escape, but when I hit this ambiguous barrier, the designer said, not like that. Now, it may be obvious to you seasoned gamers out there that this risk was never gonna pay off, but recall that reflexive, nervous sensation you get playing a level like this for the first time. Adrenaline-fueled impulse can override even the most seasoned player's exposure to years of level design custom. Taking that risk for what might be possible and then having it pay off is one of the greatest delights of playing video games in the first place. Unfortunately, Wake has many moments like these, from gaps that initially appear jumpable but aren't, obstacles that seem mountable but aren't, and note, I'm not insisting that we do anything outside the game's possibility space here. I simply want to do the things the game said that I could. The consequence then is training us not to improvise too freely with the video game instrument, diminishing the joy of successful experimentation, i.e. play, in the process. And again, we see Remedy flex their design evolution in follow-up titles. Their absolute banger Control includes similar traversal mechanics, but this time to great effect. Jesse can jump, mantle, and eventually fly through the game's open-world office complex. Here, there's very little space that you can see but can't reach. The game world was built for players to delight in and experiment with its traversal systems. By contrast, but still to great effect, Alan Wake 2 forgoes all freeform traversal mechanics beyond your basic walk jog, using prompted interactions where the occasional ledge mounting is necessary. This minor diminishment in player agency actually benefits the gameplay experience by making explicit which part of the environment is actually traversable, while also dialing in the combat experience. I was no longer tempted to leap through a narrow gap in the level or out of the way of an incoming axe swing, because that's just not an option anymore. We couldn't possibly move on from player volition without discussing the glut of passive multimedia in Alan Wake. For the uninitiated, the game is, among other themes, about the creative process. Alan is a writer, and throughout his journey, we uncover loose-leaf bits of his working manuscript. These snippets provide backstory and foreshadow the game's plot. On top of these are a regular stream of short films and radio plays, all constructing the larger world of Alan Wake's mythology. And that's all well and good, but unfortunately, a fair number of these lore nuggets have a habit of appearing in places where they halt the pace of play. For example, in the game's first section of truly open-ended gunplay, Alan is trying to reach a distant gas station to call for help after crashing his car in the woods. This trek from the accident to the store isn't super lengthy on its own, but en route we run across a rather long-winded radio broadcast and a whopping 3.5-minute episode of Night Springs. Now keep in mind, we've just come off a 30-minute walk and watch introduction, and meanwhile, I'm just trying to get our boy to the gas station like the dude just ran off a cliff and into a group of smoky demons, so maybe now isn't the time, Alan? You got blood running out of your ears from that high five your brain did with the side of a mountain.
Crashed car felt like I had woken from one nightmare and entered another.
And let me be clear, these are totally optional, but to skip them is to miss their designated purpose. The designer thought them relevant right here and now. And I want to experience these, just not right here, and just not right now. But moving on from a TV or radio means they're gone. There are many ways to include live-action elements in-game that doesn't require putting the brakes on play, and it's here that I'm a little tempted to go on a rant about the game industry's long-standing preoccupation with Hollywood and glorifying movies and TV as somehow more sophisticated forms of art, but I'm already pushing the script to the brink, so that is a different rant for a different day. But once again, Remedy shows us how their design philosophy has developed over time. Looking once more at Control, Remedy made a lot more room in its gameplay loop for engaging with the supplemental media found within. Where Alan Wake 1 often pushes the player through its play space never to return, Control invites the player to linger, retread, and explore between combat encounters. Multimedia contributes a lot more directly to the progression in Control as well, providing leads for locating objects of power that bestow Jesse with additional combat and traversal abilities. Perhaps most importantly, Control's designers did us a solid by sticking all of this media in a database, thank God, so that we can cross-reference it anytime throughout our investigation at our own volition. That is to say nothing about the use of multimedia in Alan Wake 2. If Control did it sensibly, Alan Wake 2 does it with style. Saga's Mind Palace is one of the most effortless integrations of multimedia in a game that I've ever enjoyed. Not only do we get a simple, clear, diegetic way of keeping up with Alan Wake 2's winding plot, we also get an intimate impression of how Saga thinks about and organizes information. This is design, firing on all cylinders, it's accessible, player agential, and narratively relevant. Chef's kiss, 10 out of 10, no notes. When it comes to cutscenes, oh boy do we need to talk about the We Sing level. Now that is some interactive storytelling. Remedy takes advantage of Alan's amnesia to catch us all up on the backstory of a 10-year-old game, and as we pick up momentum wandering through the studio, so does the musical narration, the lyrics filling us in on Alan's origin. In quick succession, our initially restricted player agency unfurls to maximal freedom, just as the music crescendos, propelling us into this bombastic combat encounter set among a killer score. Restricted agency is used deftly here. We walk and watch just long enough to accrue the buildup, the before the euphoric rush of rock and roll violence. Violence made possible only with this kind of careful coordination between sight, sound, and gameplay design. Remedy, truly, bravo, good show. Anyway, generally speaking, I really appreciate how Remedy handles player agency and volition in Control and Alan Wake 2, being much more careful to preserve the player's role in the storytelling process. And despite vacillating from fully playable to merely watchable a little too often for my comfort, the first Alan Wake is still an impressive piece of art. I've become rather fond of its special blend of spooky camp and existential dread. I've even warmed up to its rather fickle combat design. Oh my god, what?! At release, the life of a game is only beginning. Patches, free updates, and paid content are ways for game authors to put the final touches on their work, not just to fix bugs or refine gameplay, but also to flourish in that knowledge that they've gained from developing the main title. Undoubtedly, some of my and probably your favorite gaming moments come from downloadable content. Yet even after that final update lands, when that last DLC drops, the life of a game lives on in the mindshare of its most enthusiastic players. This isn't unique to games, of course, but games do have a special quality over other forms of art in being finished, but waiting to be completed. That superposition of possibility gives rise to forms of play the game author could have never fully anticipated, indeed, well beyond what's expected. In tabletop games, this can take the form of post-hoc house rules, and in video games, emergent modes of play take shape through speedrunning and no-clip exploration, even self-imposed challenges on top of the goals explicitly set in-game. Some dev studios prize this creativity and release development tools that allow us to assume the role of game author at home, adding new experiences to an established world or creating wholly unique works on the foundation of the original. Even for titles that don't have official tools, savvy, passionate fans have been known to reverse engineer game files, allowing them to add new experiences or fix unresolved issues. Game-agnostic software like Reshade enables neurotic goobers like yours truly to tweak the visual aesthetic of our favorite games to our little heart's content. All of this is art, emerging from art, emerging from art. So while a game's authorship bounces from developer to player, back to developer, back to player immediately after release, ultimately, it will always be the player who gives a game its final form. Or at least one among many. No single playthrough is the final form, just one among an infinite set of varying shapes. Games are art and creative medium, a canvas for our expression through skill building and fun making. In no other art form will you find such a powerful symbiosis between artist and audience, that between the game author and the play author. And speaking of that symbiosis, you might have noticed that I've mostly focused on the player side of this relationship and what the game author provides us to play with. Failing to describe what players provide developers in return, both good and bad, is to miss a whole other side of this picture. So, looks like there's going to be a spiritual part 2 to this, pals, because that chapter, it only kept growing bigger the more I realized how inadequate it was. It was basically the length of this entire video before I decided, yeah, that needs to be its own thing. What gaming moments empowered or played with or subverted your agency and volition? I want to hear all about that in the comments below. And Sam Lake, Mark Dara, if you happen to see this video, thank you for sharing your dev experience candidly with the world in various interviews and retrospectives. It is rare and illuminating insight that helps remind us all that behind these behemoth interactive artworks are just people trying to make something cool. And speaking of, I made virtually all of this, from the writing to the modeling. No, not that kind of modeling, this kind of modeling, along with the research and the audio mixing and the yapping and the dressing and all the So, if you want more of this, check out one of those links up there. Maybe throw me some cash if you can, if you want. And there's plenty of buttons you can click to let our YouTube overlords know that you think people should be watching Gameservatory. And until next time, friends, happy gaming. I am having fun with myself.
Hey!
Ow! 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 Dude, it's bad.
Oh no!
It's like bleeding under the skin.
Oh no!
It's okay.
Some of y'all are... Oh, my roommate's coming in. No, you're fine. If you can't tell, all the blood is rushing to my brain. I no longer remember Hyper's name. Bye.